Hello, my name is Professor Shiladitya Rakshit. Right to humanitarian assistance, main actors and guiding principles. Learning outcomes. To understand the role of right to humanitarian assistance, to understand the role of governmental and non-governmental humanitarian organizations, to understand the role of the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA. Introduction. For the past few decades, the humanitarian assistance provides situations of war and disasters by various governments, international organizations such as UN and non-governmental organizations, NGOs such as ICRC in situations of armed conflict and natural disasters, has served hundreds of thousands of lives and helped to mitigate the sufferings. The assistance such as provisions for food and medical supplies to refugees, displaced persons and those near the battlefields in Somalia, Rwanda, Zaire, Mozambique, Angola, Liberia, Sudan and other places are some of the glaring examples in these decades. Various NGOs are also in the forefront of providing humanitarian assistance to the needy people. The various organizations working in the direction can be called as humanitarian organizations. The various humanitarian activities by the world community led to the establishment of a claim that is a right to humanitarian assistance. Various international organizations have framed different principles and rules for guiding and facilitating the activities of humanitarian assistance. Observance of these guidelines and principles are necessary for the effective enjoyment and realization of right to humanitarian assistance, governmental and non-governmental humanitarian organizations. Humanitarian organizations help to ensure that there is swift, efficient humanitarian assistance available when sudden natural disasters strike or wars occur or in connection with long-term conflicts. Some of the important humanitarian organizations are Humanitarian Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA. OCHA is the part of the United Nations Secretariat responsible for bringing together humanitarian sectors to ensure a coherent response to emergencies. OCHA also ensures there is a framework within which each actor can contribute to the overall response effort. OCHA mission is to mobilize and coordinate effective and principled humanitarian action in partnership with national and international actors in order to alleviate human sufferings through disasters and emergencies. Advocates the right of people in need, promote preparedness and prevention, and facilitate sustainable solutions. From over 30 offices around the world, some 1,900 specialized and dedicated OCHA staff work to ensure that effective assistance reaches millions of humanitarian beneficiaries in 4 continents. Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. The UNHCR was established by United Nations General Assembly on December 14, 1950, with an explicit obligation to provide humanitarian assistance to refugees, that is, persons compelled to flee from their home countries due to man-made or natural disaster. The agency is mandated to lead and coordinate international action to protect refugees and resolve refugee problems worldwide. Its primary purpose is to safeguard the rights and well-being of refugees. It strives to ensure that everyone can exercise the right to seek asylum and find safe refuge in another state with the opinion return home voluntarily, integrate locally, or resettle in a third country. It also has a mandate to help stateless people. Since 1950, the agency has helped tens of millions of people restart their lives. Today, a staff of more than 9,300 people in 123 countries continues to help and protect millions of refugees, returnees, IDPs, and stateless people. The International Red Cross and the Red Crescent Movement. The International Red Cross and the Red Crescent Movement are dedicated to preventing and alleviating human suffering in warfare and emergence such as epidemics, floods, and earthquakes. It is not a single organization. It is composed of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and the 189 individual national societies. Each has its own legal identity and role, but they are all united by 7 fundamental principles. These principles are humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. Each component of the movement is committed to respect and uphold them. The ICRC exclusive humanitarian mission is to protect the lives and dignity of victims of armed conflicts and situations of violence and to provide them with assistance. It directs and coordinates the movement's international relief activities during armed conflicts. Established in 1863, it is at the origin of the movement. The Federation inspires, facilitates, and promotes all humanitarian activities carried out by its member national societies on behalf of the most vulnerable people. It directs and coordinates its members' actions to assist the victims of natural and technological disasters, refugees, and those affected by health emergencies. It was founded in 1990. National societies act as auxiliaries to the national authorities in the humanitarian field. They provide a range of services including disaster relief and health and social programs. In wartime, they may assist the civilian population and support the medical services of the armed forces. Now, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF. MSF is an independent humanitarian relief agency that provides medical aid around the world. It operates where there is no medical infrastructure or existing infrastructures cannot withstand the pressures in which they are subjected. In most cases, relief programs become rehabilitation projects that may run for several years after the most urgent needs have been met. For more than 40 years, MSF has been providing medical assistance to people affected by armed conflicts, natural disasters, disease, epidemics, malnutrition, crisis, and other emergencies. By providing medical humanitarian assistance, MSF acts as witnesses and may speak out in public about the suffering of the people we assist. By bringing public attention to a crisis, MSF seeks to alleviate human suffering and to restore dignity to individuals, human beings, regardless of race, identity, religion, or political affiliation. The organizations such as United Nations Children's Fund, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, the United Nations Population Fund, the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, International Organization for Migration, Global Forum for Disaster Reduction, United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund, World Food Programme, and major NGOs like CARE, Save the Children, Catholic Relief Services, World Vision, Oxfam, and many less well-known organizations were also working with a view to mitigate the sufferings of individuals by providing the necessary humanitarian assistance to them. Rules and guidelines established by various instruments. There are various international instruments which provide rules and guidelines to facilitate the humanitarian assistance activities all over the world. Some of the important instruments are the guidelines are as follows. General Assembly Resolution number A, Resolution 40-182, 1991. According to this resolution, humanitarian assistance must be provided in accordance with the principle of humanity, neutrality and impartiality. The sovereignty, territorial integrity and national unity of states must be fully respected to accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Humanitarian assistance should be provided only with the consent and request of the affected country. Each state has a responsibility first and the foremost to take care of the victims of natural disasters and other emergencies occurring on its territory. Therefore, the affected state has the primary role in the initiation, organization, coordination and implementation of humanitarian assistance within its territory. Resolution calls for international cooperation to address emergency situations should be provided in accordance with international law and national laws. States whose populations are in need of humanitarian assistance are called upon to facilitate the work of various organizations in implementing humanitarian assistance, in particular the supply of food, medicine, shelter and healthcare, which access to victims essential. In order to ensure a smooth transition from relief to rehabilitation and development, emergency assistance should be provided in ways that will be supportive of recovery and long-term development. Thus, emergency measures should be seen as a step towards long-term development. The resolution further states that economic growth and sustainable development are essential for prevention of and preparedness against natural disasters and other emergencies. Hence, humanitarian assistance should therefore be accompanied by a renewal of commitment to economic growth and sustainable development of developing countries. In this context, adequate resources must be made available to address their development problems. Further, it states that contributions for humanitarian assistance should be provided in a way which is not to the detriment of resources made available for international cooperation for development, guiding principles on the right to humanitarian assistance by Institute of Humanitarian Law. This instrument provides various principles for the effective realization of right to humanitarian assistance. It states that every human being has a right to humanitarian assistance in order to ensure respect for the human rights to the life, health, protection against cruel and degrading treatment and other human rights which are essential to survival, well-being and protection in public emergencies. Humanitarian assistance may consist of any material indispensable to the survival of victims such as foodstuffs, water, medication, medical supplies and equipment, minimum shelter, clothing of services such as medical services, tracing services, religious and spiritual assistance, as well as civil defense in conformity with the tasks defined in international humanitarian law. The right to humanitarian assistance implies the right to request and receive such assistance as well as to participate in its practical implementation. Persons affected by an emergency may address themselves to competent national or international organization and other potential donors to request humanitarian assistance. They shall not be persecuted or punished for making such a request. According to this instrument, the right to humanitarian assistance may be invoked A. when essential humanitarian needs of human beings in an emergency are not being met, so that the abandonment of victims without assistance would constitute a threat to human life or a grave offense to human dignity, and B. when all local possibilities and domestic procedures have been exhausted within a reasonable time and vital needs are not satisfied or not fully satisfied, so that there is no other possibility to ensure the prompt provision of supplies and services essential for the persons affected. It further states that the primary responsibility to protect and assist the victims of emergencies is that of the authorities of the territories in which the emergency causing urgent humanitarian need occurs. National authorities, national and international organizations whose statutory mandates provide for the possibility of rendering humanitarian assistance, such as the ICRC, the UNHCR, other organizations of the UN system, and professional humanitarian organizations have the right to offer such assistance when the conditions laid down in the present principles are fulfilled. This offer should not be regarded as an unfriendly act or an interference in a state's internal affairs. The authorities of the state concerned in the exercise of the sovereign rights to extend their cooperation concerning the offer of humanitarian assistance to their populations. According to this instrument, for the implementation of the right to humanitarian assistance, it is essential to ensure the access of victims to potential donors and access of qualified national and international organizations, state or other donors to the victims when their offer of humanitarian assistance is accepted in the case of a refusal of the offer or of access to the victims when humanitarian assistance or action is agreed upon. The states and organizations concerned may undertake all necessary steps to ensure such access in conformity with international humanitarian law and human rights instruments in force. The competent United Nations organs and regional organizations may undertake necessary measures, including coercion, in accordance with their respective mandates. In cases of severe, prolonged mass suffering of populations which could be alleviated by humanitarian assistance, these measures may be resorted to when an offer has been refused without justification or when the provision of humanitarian assistance encounters serious difficulties. In the event of measures or coercion being resorted to by competent UN organs for reasons other than those of a humanitarian nature, the right to humanitarian assistance should be respected, in particular by exempting from such measures materials for the essential humanitarian needs of the populations. In the case of measures of coercion undertaken by the competent UN organs and regional organizations, when humanitarian assistance is provided for, these organs should ensure that such assistance is not diverted for political, military, and other similar purposes, and that the principles of humanity, neutrality, and impartiality will be fully respected and implemented. It further states that the status and protection of personnel engaged in humanitarian assistance operations shall be regulated on the basis of the applicable law. This is the case in particular as regards the personnel of the United Nations or of organizations of the UN system when engaged in humanitarian assistance. Activities, the personnel of ICRC, the personnel of professional organizations and with humanitarian objectives, and the personnel of other national and international organizations engaged in humanitarian assistance activities. The status, rights, obligations of all these categories of personnel should be regulated by the respective national and international rules. It also states that in order to improve efficiency and to avoid duplications and waste, efforts of the various actors in any humanitarian assistance operations should be coordinated by those who bear the main responsibility for such operations. The Mohonk Criteria 1993. The Mohonk Criteria is a set of principles formulated by a task force on ethical and legal issues in humanitarian assistance, appointed by the Program on Humanitarian Assistance at the World Conference on Religion and Peace. The criteria addresses critical issues in providing humanitarian assistance during complex emergencies. It starts with the premise that a mandate for providing humanitarian assistance to those in need emerges from notions of fundamental human rights. According to this instrument, everyone has a right to request and receive humanitarian aid necessary to sustain life and dignity from competent authorities or local, national or international governmental and non-governmental organizations. And humanitarian agencies have the right to offer and deliver that humanitarian and, where needed, consistent with universal principles embodied in international humanitarian and human rights law. It states that certain humanitarian principles must govern all humanitarian assistance, including humanity. Human suffering should be addressed wherever it is found. The dignity and the rights of all victims must be respected and protected. Impartiality. Humanitarian assistance should be provided without discrimination as to ethnic origin, gender, nationality, political opinion, race or religion. Belief of the suffering of individuals must be guided solely by their needs, and priority must be given to the most urgent cases of distress. Neutrality. Humanitarian assistance should be provided without engaging in hostilities or taking sides in controversies of a political, religious or ideological nature. The independence of action by humanitarian agencies should not be infringed on or unduly influenced by political, military or other interests. Empowerment. Humanitarian assistance should strive to revitalize local institutions, enabling them to provide for the needs of the affected community. Humanitarian assistance should provide a solid first step on the continuum of emergency relief, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and development. Finally, these criteria recognizes that humanitarian assistance must be provided within a continuum of responses, respect the culture and dignity of aid recipients, and involve them fully. Humanitarian assistance should stress self-reliance, address root causes to the extent possible, and proceed from emergency relief to rehabilitation, reconstruction, repatriation or resettlement and sustainable development. It further states that humanitarian assistance should be protect and care for the whole person, including his or her human rights, and should seek to reach the most vulnerable children, the elderly, persons with disabilities, the poor and women. Resolution of the Institute of International Law 2003. According to this resolution, the victims of disaster are entitled to request and receive humanitarian assistance. Assistance may be sought of on behalf of the victims by the members of the group, by local and regional authorities, the government of the affected state, and national or international organizations. Humanitarian assistance shall be offered and, if accepted, distributed without any discrimination on prohibited grounds while taking into account the needs of the most vulnerable groups. It specifically states that leaving the victims of disaster without humanitarian assistance constitutes a threat to human life and an offense to human dignity and therefore a violation of fundamental human rights. Further, it states that the affected state has a duty to take care of the victims of disaster in its territory and is therefore the primary responsibility in the organization, provision and distribution of humanitarian assistance. As a result, it has the duty to take the necessary measures to prevent the misappropriation of humanitarian assistance and other abuses. Any other authority exercising jurisdiction or de facto control over the victims of disaster, for example, in case of disintegration of the governmental authority, has the duty to provide them with the necessary humanitarian assistance and also has all the other duties and rights of the affected state provided for in this resolution. Whenever the affected state is unable to provide sufficient humanitarian assistance to the victims placed under its jurisdiction or de facto control, it shall seek assistance from competent international organizations and or from third states. It also provides that states and organizations have the right to offer humanitarian assistance to the affected state. Such an offer shall not be considered unlawful interference in the internal affairs of the affected states to the extent that it has an exclusively Such an offer shall not be considered unlawful interference in the internal affairs of the affected state to the extent that it has an exclusively humanitarian character. The states and organizations have the right to provide humanitarian assistance to victims in the affected states, subject to the consent of these states. According to this resolution, any intentionally directing attacks against personnel, installations, goods or vehicles involved in a humanitarian assistance action is serious breach of fundamental principles of international law. If such serious breaches are committed, the accused persons shall be brought to trial before a competent domestic or international court or tribunal. Summary. Now, from the reading of the above, let's summarize the fundamental principles of humanitarian assistance. An analysis of above mentioned instruments and various other instruments shows that while providing humanitarian assistance, certain fundamental principles should be considered. They are humanity. The principle of humanity dictates that such aid should consist of goods and services essential to the survival of the population, that it should be provided to the civilian population deprived of the basic necessities of life as a result of conflict, and that the purpose of the aid should be to alleviate human sufferings and protect human life, health and dignity. Impartiality. The principle of impartiality requires that humanitarian aid must be provided in a non-discriminatory manner and must be proportional to the needs of the population. Non-discrimination implies that no distinction should be made between the beneficiaries of aid for the sole reason of belonging to a particular group except on the grounds of humanitarian necessity. Neutrality. The requirement that humanitarian assistance must be neutral stems from the humanitarian nature and the preferential treatment provided under law. First and foremost, the principle of neutrality requires that a distinction must be made between combatants and civilians. Only civilians are entitled to receive humanitarian assistance. It is therefore vital that humanitarian organizations and personnel do their utmost to distinguish them between the two. Thank you.